Welcome to another Expertcast. Today we are going to be talking about property sourcing. Delighted to be joined today by Janice Minihan. Janice is an entrepreneur who eats, breathes and lives property. With a teaching career spanning 15 years, property was always her next favourite thing to do. After having a family, she became very disillusioned with the educational system and decided to pursue property in earnest after moving to the UK from Australia in 2014. Janice focuses on working to improve the life of not just herself but her family, and has established several successful businesses within the last 5 years. Janice, thank you very much for your time today.
Nice to be here, Rob. Thanks for having me.
It's quite a lot to take in there. Moving from Australia to the UK to start off with is, great achievement, because some people get scared of moving country. But before we get into the nooks and crannies of property sourcing, can you just give people a little bit more background about yourself, where you were and how you've ended up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I'm a property entrepreneur, I think more so than a teacher. While I love teaching, the paperwork side of it did me in the end, and I couldn't do what I wanted to do with teaching children. So property allowed me to get out, embrace various strategies, be creative, and through education discovered a whole heap of strategies that I could utilise. And being from Australia, moving here, even though I'd been here off and on over the last 10 years before that, it gave me an opportunity to go and explore that property idea, get some education and start fresh. So that's exactly what I did. And in 5 years, I've done many more strategies than I'd ever have done in Australia or did in Australia in the 7 years beforehand. And like to consider that I know what I'm doing now.
I think it's fair to say, given your successes, that you do know what you're doing. So I don't think anyone's going to doubt that one bit, especially when we get into the details regarding sourcing.
Yeah, no, sourcing's something that I didn't quite know was even a career, but as it turns out, you can help lots of people through sourcing and do it ethically. So that's what I'm about. So happy to share what I know with you.
Great. Really looking forward to getting deep into that. In terms of what got you into property, I know you mentioned that you become disillusioned with the educational system. Was there a particular moment that made you go, I need to do something different? Or was it a book that you read? How did that moment feel and what happened?
Yeah, probably two main moments. Sort of just had my second child and on maternity leave, always doing property, just take the children off to viewings with me. My dad was a builder and was doing sort of projects in a different part of Queensland. But I was watching him from the sidelines, I guess. And then he flipped 2 properties in quick succession and made 1.5 times my teaching salary just out of those 2. So that was my first one going, right, I probably need to learn a bit more about this, because my hard graft that I'm doing in teaching to what he's just done over a few months is worth considering. And then the second one, when I moved to the UK and I couldn't teach for 11 weeks, I picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which my dad had given me about years beforehand that I've never had time to read. And I read that. And by the end of that book, I decided I was going to go to a Rich Dad, Poor Dad 2-hour seminar, and the rest is history.
That book is seminal. So many people say it was that book that really made them open their eyes, and obviously got the practical example there of your dad as well. So it's good to have that. It's good to have that blend.
Yeah, it changed my life quite literally.
Why did you end up moving to the UK? Was that a family reason, or was that just because of the opportunities that presented themselves in the UK?
No, family reason. My husband's family are from Lancashire, and I wanted my children really to get to know their English family rather than being teenagers or adults before they met them, so they could have the best of both worlds. And the property market in the UK being a positively geared model as opposed to Australia's, which is negatively geared, just really allowed me to flourish and do what I could never do in Australia, really. So it served many purposes, and I love it.
Must have been quite a culture shock and a weather shock moving from Australia to Lancashire.
Yeah, a little bit different. I'm from Brisbane and the weather's perfect pretty much year round. So apart from spending the first 12 months in a coat and very warm clothes, I'm acclimatized now, and I'm very proud to say I'm quite warm at 8 degrees, whereas in Brisbane, that's a really cold day.
If you go up to Newcastle, I think people will be throwing their toys out the pram. I think they like it a bit colder up there. But
nice. I'll stick to Lancashire.
It's a lovely part. It's a lovely part of the country, anyway.
It is.
Moving on to property sourcing, then. So I know there's many different ways it can be done, but what is property sourcing and how does it work?
So basically, property sourcing is, for me, being able to fulfill my clients' criteria of what they're looking for in a property. It's mainly about being ethical. Without that, I don't think you get anything. And all my clients, given that they're all out of area, but either UK-based or internationally based, they need to trust the person who's sourcing them a property, that it fits their criteria. They're predominantly handing over a lot of money, and some of them don't even see their property. So for me, it's important that they've gone from having this idea of wanting to buy a property to having a successful property at the end of it that can generate income for them.
So would you say a property sourcer is a bit like an estate agent, or is there a key difference between the two?
Definitely similarities to an estate agent. However, an estate agent works for the seller, is trying to get the best price for the seller, whereas a sourcer is working for the buyer and trying to just mold the relationship and find the deal that works for them. And different investors have different criteria, and they're looking for different things, different strategies. And I think that's where the key to being a successful sourcer is being to adapt your toolbox to suit a property or an area or an investor's needs, as opposed to just ringing up an estate agent and viewing as many of whatever they've got on the market at whatever price point, and them trying to sell you it. And it might not actually fit your criteria in the beginning anyway.
So if someone was looking at starting a property sourcing business from scratch, would you say it's more important to have clients lined up with their details first so you know what you're looking for, or to get some random deals in the bank and then try and find people to buy them? How would you approach that?
Really interesting question, exactly where I started. So when I started out as an investor, I did get the odd property accepted. So I did what my training said, and I got 40 offers out. And then sometimes you get several that drop in at the same time, but you can't do all of them, and they were good deals. So I went looking initially for people to buy them, take them off my hands, because I didn't want to let the estate agent down. And it was really hard, and I lost a couple. And then on the backside of that, you lose face with the agent. So through our platform, propertydealstore.co.uk, we developed this platform to allow people who do have deals, might be in their initial stages, to put their deals on, and we have the database so we can marry the two up, because it's really hard. You could get the client base and then never get a deal. So we've tried to fill that niche by developing our platform.
If someone was just starting in sourcing, would you say that
starting?
Yeah, for what you've achieved and what you've just said about a property deal store, do you think someone would be able to do that from straight away, or is it important to take time to focus on building the relationships both with the agents and people that want to invest but don't necessarily want to do the legwork?
If they can, yeah. I think networking is key. So if they wanted to be a sourcer and they might want to start it off as a side hustle, I guess, to their current job, with the eventual goal to be to move out of their job and focus on sourcing, because it can be very lucrative if you do it right. And as we progress, becoming a regulated deal sourcer holds you in good stead, which I can go through later. But right at the start, it's all about relationships, and whether you do that with the agents in your local area, or you go to networking meets and meet your investors. And it's not just a one-time meeting and they go on your database. It's usually over a series of weeks, months, years sometimes, until they've got that know, like, and trust. And that's how you grow and be able to form both sides of the puzzle. So you're getting the deals through, and you've also got investors to source them to.
That's important. That's really good information for someone to take away. And you mentioned that the sourcing can be quite lucrative. And look forward to touching based on a couple of examples of deals that have been done. If someone was looking to use a property sourcer, would your advice be, again, just build that relationship, build that rapport? What would the big no-nos be if of property sourcing? Would someone be expected to pay the fees up front? What do the fees look like? Does that vary on the deal? How does that side of it work?
So the fees do vary on the deal. It depends on your area as well. So the bigger deals might have a percentage fee, say 1%, 2% of the overall project. So commercial to residential, for example, would probably be more of a percentage, whereas, for example, what I do locally is I find a property, and depending on the return on investment, ROI, I base my sourcing fee on how strong those numbers are. And different investors require different ROIs. But generally, let's just say for today, for example, I've sourced one. It's a £4,000 deal as a sourcer. So I require a £1,000 reservation fee to take it off the table. I encourage them to come and do a viewing. I give them all the information they need up front to make an informed decision. Once they've viewed it, if they didn't want to continue it, I'd refund their reservation fee. If they did want to continue it, then that fee becomes non-refundable, and the remainder of the fee is due on completion. And I think that's pretty standard practice.
I see stories or you hear stories that sourcing agents sometimes requesting all the money up front, and basically people that are operating very dodgy. Would you say that's quite common when you're talking to other property sources, or that's just the odd one or two making it bad for everyone else?
I think it's becoming less and less common. I have heard and I have seen some of my own clients who have been bitten by sources in the past, and makes them really skeptical, of course, to go on to using another sourcer, because obviously the first experience wasn't great. They've lost money, and unfortunately it's really hard to claw it back. Which I think for somebody who's regulated in the first place, that sets them apart from anyone who says they're a sourcer, because you've got to spend money to be regulated, and then you abide by the rules that are out there. And for me, I wouldn't touch anybody who wasn't regulated in the first place. And I think that's where the property industry is going through a change, and this is becoming more common. It's the only type of sources I will deal with.
Moving on to regulations then, can you just explain what sort of regulations you would have to adhere to being a legitimate property sourcing agent?
Yeah, sure. So there's only a few key things really, and there's lots of stories of going around out there, and sourcing's the new buzzword, and there's lots of property courses that you can go and learn how to be a sourcer. And then I have people contact me through the platform and ring and have a chat because they're looking to become sourcing agents, and they get told that it's going to cost them about £2,000 to get regulated. But really, when you break it down, you can do it all for about £500 to £600, depending on which insurance broker you use. So, for example, you need professional indemnity insurance. That's your most expensive. You need to be registered for anti-money laundering. Actually, sorry, that's the most expensive. PI insurance isn't onerous. Being a member of the NRLA is good practice anyway. That's minimal. Data protection through the ICO, £30 a year. And being part of something like the property redress scheme just shows you're on, anyone can Google you through the PRS and see that you are part of their body. And again, it's like £80 a year. So I think it's for what it is, and it steps you apart aside from the rest, then it's well worth the investment.
And then from an investor's point of view, your advice would be, when you're looking to team up with a sourcing agent, these are the things that you should look for, because it steps proper people apart. Absolutely.
Yep. And it's all easy to find on the internet. If they go to each of those websites, the sourcer would have to produce their own PI insurance, but the rest of them, you could just have a look online and make sure they're registered.
Hypothetically speaking, if you find a project for someone, and let's just say they live in a foreign country and they're not able to view the property physically, would you then, as an agent, sourcing agent, would you then look to do maybe a Skype viewing? Would you send photos? How would that process work if I was looking to invest from abroad?
So my international clients know me personally, and that's how I run my sourcing service anyway. But if they just found a sourcer and they thought a deal looked good and they didn't know much about them, as well as checking out their regulation, if they wanted to check out a property further, then a sourcer should produce the very minimum photos of the product of the property. A lot, because of where we're at the moment, videos of the property are good. Or you could do a live, Skype or a Zoom, and walk through the property and have a look. And things like refurb quotes, or put them in touch with your builder and they could have a chat. Just anything that will help them get a full picture of the property in question, because it is a big thing. If you're international, I actually don't know that I could do it, but it's a lot of trust. And I think you've got to be confident that the person you're putting that trust in can carry the deal through.
And as you said before, it takes time to build trust. And trust doesn't just happen after one day.
No, not at all. It's a series. And it's, there are a variety of means. So if you're a sourcer and you're treating it like a business, then you should have a Facebook page, and you might have a website, you might not, but a lot of people do business these days through social media, and they can see the types of deals you have, testimonials, anything like that, which will build your credibility.
What would the big red flags be? And again, I appreciate for people listening, and if you're reading this, is why I'm coming from an investor point of view. We'll sort of move on from that aspect moving forward. But from an investor point of view, are there any other red flags are there any other potential red flags, things to look out for if you're new to property and you're looking to get the first couple of deals done via a sourcer? Any red flags that you can advise people of?
Yeah, pretty much. Your regulation's key. The other one is money up front. A genuine sourcer looking to help other people should never, or would never, that I know of, request a whole sourcing fee up front. It needs to have a portion of being refundable. And just open and honest. If you've asked for photos, they'll be able to produce photos and they're accurate. So there's no point fluffing it up, because it is what it is at the end of the day. And that's all based on credibility and relationships. And if you can't get clear answers out of the sourcer, then maybe they're not the sourcer for you.
Great advice. That's so take heed of that for people looking to get started. And of course, if you're looking to get started as a property sourcer, as Janice says, look at all the regulations, set yourself up properly, and you see, if you treat it like a business, you get business results. If you treat it like a hobby, you get hobby results.
Absolutely.
Normally throughout the series, I'm asking how people pick their area. You said for family ties, you've ended up in Lancashire, and then you've got sort of existing clients as well, which is great. But if someone was, let's just say I'm based in, pick a random place, Middlesbrough. I'm based in Middlesbrough. I'm fresh into property. I'm based in Middlesbrough. Would you say to follow the same principles? Give yourself a name, get yourself regulated, and then find clients and what they're after. Because if you have some clients that say, well, I want some buy-to-lets, or I want commercial conversions, within an area you can do multiple sourcing strategies. Is that a fair assumption? Is that a right thing to say?
Yeah, that's perfect. What I did forget to say before, if you are setting up as a sourcer, you also need a client account, and that proves to your investor that you are keeping things separate, you are doing it business-like, and a client account just keeps everything nice and clean, refunds, sourcing fees, everything can go through that. But yeah, if you were saying Middlesbrough, I think you're in a great part of the world anyway, because everyone wants to invest up north, and set yourself up first and foremost. That might take a couple of weeks, but then the mistake I made right in the beginning was looking to an area an hour away from where I lived, So I had all that travel time and actually never got a single deal there. And then when I finally looked at the town I lived in, it was perfect. So if you're in a northern town, very hotspot, very good hotspot for investors anyway, then check out your town, talk to the agents, see what the deals are, see what the key strategies are for a start. And if you are new and starting, then you might just start on sourcing buy-to-lets, move into HMOs or commercial. It's only 5 years down the track now with some commercial experience that I'd even consider sourcing those kind of deals.
If you're dealing with agents, and you know you're a sourcer, would you be upfront and say that to the agents, or would you sort of do it a bit under the radar, or does that lead to too many problems and a break of faith further on down the line?
So over the years, initially, well, my theory is if I find a deal and I aim to source it, because they all know me very well now because I've built that relationship over the years, I will tell them I'm sourcing it. But in the early days, as an investor, I guess I had a little bit of an advantage in that whatever I couldn't source, my goal was to purchase it myself. So firstly, if I wouldn't be prepared to purchase it myself, then I wouldn't source it out. If I couldn't find a buyer or the deal fell out, then I had to have the means to go and find the money or invest in it myself because I didn't want to let anybody down. And that served me really well. And I've bought properties that I had sourced where 6 months down the track, the buyers pulled out for whatever reason. And then I've completed on it a couple of weeks later, just so the vendor hasn't lost his sale after all of that. And that's as recent as last year. So, whereas I do know a lot of people go into sourcing, they might be young, looking to get into property. They don't have much of a pot. And it depends which agents you work with and whether they're comfortable with you sourcing on a property that they've got listed because you're not the direct buyer. So again, it comes back to relationships and what you can arrange with them. Because if they know you've got a supply of investors that are different to their investors, then it can be a win-win and it can work really well.
In terms of finding deals, we've just focused on agents there. I mean, I imagine there's multiple ways in which you can obtain deals. Can you just, before we go into that, can you just explain the difference between what an off-market deal would be in comparison to what a normal on-market deal is?
So off-market, as they say, your net worth is your net worth. And so those off-market deals come through that network and advertising and being on the ground and being trustworthy. And so you get these direct-to-vendor leads potentially, whether that be from you to you directly or from somebody else. And then you're able to follow it up and put together a deal that's a win for them and a win for you and a win for the investor. And so there's plenty of deals out there. And if you can get that direct-to-vendor sort of deal, then you can create that win-win scenario and hopefully all parties get what they need out of it.
And if you're sourcing, you mentioned your network, which is good, but are there any other methods? I mean, leaflets, paper advertising, how would you go about obtaining as many leads as possible?
Yeah. So places like Gumtree and leaflets, flyers, business cards. I've done letters through doors, just talking to people, empty houses, knock on the house next door, you might get some information. You could land registry for £3, a particular property that you might know is empty, been empty for a long time. You could do land registry and find the address of the owner and the owner, send them a letter. And I know people have been very successful with that method. Across social media, various newspapers, magazines, not so popular, but I do. People still use newspapers. People still read newspapers. Just depends what your appetite is, I guess, your budget and how much time you've got to invest in it.
Rolling on to some examples, we said we'd touch base on them as well. So again, you don't have to give away location or anything like that, but some examples of deals that you've done that involve different strategies. If you can run through some numbers, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So my bread and butter deals are in an up and coming town, for example, and I pick selective licensing areas because generally speaking, they're lower priced than the better areas of town. But it depends on the strategy. So my strategy is mini HMOs. Selective licensing areas in my town are very centrally located to town centre, to public transport, and it works really well, and they're really popular with investors. So I go for those areas. I can pick up properties under 40,000. So for an investor, that's enticing. There's no stamp duty at the moment. And we work with the council then to use what we call an empty home loan to bring those properties back into use. And obviously an added incentive for an investor is if they can get £20,000 interest free to help them with the refurb and bring a property back into use, it not only provides excellent accommodation for somebody for the mini HMO for rooms going forward, it helps the council with their headache and having these empty homes just sitting there in these areas, and the investor gets a really high yielding property. So that's my core. Whereas if I had an investor who wants just a standard buy to let, they've got a higher budget, they want to put it on a mortgage, I would look slightly outside of those areas and find them a better property in a better location and cater for the most of those clients want, like a working family or professionals. And so you need to know your area like the back of your hand.
And in terms of the numbers that you make from that, and again, you know, any examples you got is useful. I know you say that you charge roughly depending on what the ROI is. Is that what would your minimum fee be? What's, you know, have you got an average fee?
Okay, so let's go through.
Understand, just so people understand.
Yeah. So let's just say this one, for example, today is a £35,000 property. My fee for it is £4,000. It is entitled to a £20,000 interest-free loan, and from the council. But the refurb on that kind of property, because it has been left empty for a long time, you're looking at about a £30,000 refurb. So, well, the council loan's great, doesn't cover it all. And the done up value of something in that area, you might be looking at 55 to 60,000. So yes, it's great, but it's, if you look at the numbers, slightly negative equity, but they're popular because you can cash flow it as a mini HMO rather than a buy to let. And the numbers using that kind of strategy don't really work as a buy to let. Although as a backup, it's a good option as well. So that's my standard deal. I've done other ones in slightly better areas, for example, like a £75,500 property. You'd be looking at a £25,000. Everything I buy needs a refurb. So a £25,000 refurb, and I strip them right back and put them all back together so they don't need touching for hopefully 10 years. And then you're looking at a done up value. Well, I've actually sold this particular one and I sold it at 112. So, and that's 5 minutes from where I've got the £35,000 property, if that. So just areas are very important to know, because one side of the street might work fabulous and then the other side doesn't. Or top and bottom, that kind of thing.
How did you go about setting the sourcing prices? Because it seems from, you know, research, a lot of people, everyone's got their own methodology of doing it. Do you suppose, again, if someone's just starting and they're not familiar with dealing with sources and they might not know what a fair price is to pay for having a deal sourced, is there any advice you can give people on that front?
Yeah, so if you are new, you do have to start somewhere, and people do appreciate that if you're open and honest. And so potentially you might just start at a couple of thousand when you start sourcing, just to start building up your reputation, building up a bank of investors. And then as you start getting established and people come to you, the tables turn a little bit. So if you can give people what they want within a specified time frame, then, and you're producing a quality service and you've got systems in place and all of that kind of stuff, then that's sometimes, and depending on the numbers, like the ROI, then you can start to command a higher fee. And I guess that's just growth over time and reputation. It all comes down to reputation, really.
And there'd be no harm in testing that as well, because effectively you're adding, as being a middle person, a sourcer can add a lot of value for
Absolutely.
A hands-off investment. This is quite common when it's just a numbers game. You have to factor in, if you're living abroad or you're not even living anywhere near your investment area, a lot of, some people do start, I'll say criticising, that's not the right word, but some people will look at a sourcing fee and go, well, I'm not paying that. Then the opposite is, well, then you go and find it yourself. There is a cost to the service, isn't there?
Absolutely. And it's that if you find the right sourcer, and one might specialise in buy-to-lets, one might specialise in commercial to resi conversions, whatever, but that knowledge and that fee that they're commanding, that's what they're saving you the legwork, they're saving you the time up and down the motorway, they've already got the relationships established. So oftentimes the property may be BMV that potentially you couldn't get on the market for that kind of price, but because it also has those relationships, those trade properties through, say it was an agent or whoever, regularly, then the sourcing fee, the amount you save on using a sourcer, the sourcing fee becomes a great deal, even included in the property in the first place, because it's not something you could actually get potentially yourself.
It is all a numbers game, and it's how investors look at that as well. I know that, if I was abroad and had a solid relationship, it's fair to say that we do, to be honest, we've worked together before.
Yeah.
So we've got that trust between us as well. I know if I was abroad and something popped up and it met the criteria, implicitly, we just go ahead and do it because we've done that before, because of what you've just said, that value's there. Yes, it's an extra few thousand or whatever it is, but factor that into the numbers, then you've got to do your analysis, and the sort of pressure's taken off you then. If you're looking to buy, is leveraging other people's networks and systems. And there's always going to be a cost to that, or an investment to that, if you're looking from an investor's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. It is all about the numbers and deals that a sourcer may present, especially if they're off market. Then that's where I believe real quality, real quality deals are created, because you don't have that agent in there either, and you're just dealing directly with a vendor who has come to you in the first place because you can help them. And they're obviously in a bind or for whatever reason motivated to sell, and your expertise in putting together that deal could serve an investor that's not in the area and helps them build their portfolio.
Devil's in the detail, absolutely. It's, couldn't agree with you. I'm even lost for words. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more with you on that. A lot of times people are going to be asked to sign an NDA. What is an NDA, and what purpose does an NDA serve?
So a non-disclosure agreement is a standard practice in property, standard with sources. If you were interested in a deal, it's a document that you sign that you don't disclose. The information's for your information and your eyes only, and it gives the sources some protection that, and you'd like to think that people don't do this, but unfortunately it does happen occasionally, that they don't approach a vendor or somebody directly. If the source has put all the time and effort into getting a deal done, that they're not circumvented by a potential buyer going directly to that owner, say offering them a sweeter deal to cut the sourcer out. So it protects the sourcer, I guess, from that, making sure their deals are looked after.
Has that happened to you before, when someone's gone behind your back and unfortunately done that?
No, not me personally. I'm really lucky, but I think that's because I take the time to get to know people, and I think if you've got that mutual bond, then you're doing right by everybody. There's no need for them. If the numbers speak for themselves, like you said, the devil's in the detail. So if it doesn't work with the sourcing fee, then they're not going to buy it, and what works for one person may not work for another. I think that just comes down to how how you can put together particular deals.
So it sounds like from everything that you've explained so far that it's very, given a couple of weeks, it can be very straightforward to get this strategy up and running, yet it is going to take time to build up those solid relationships and then find out who you can trust and who's a bit, iffy, to say the least. So It sounds like it's easy to start, but once you're actually really into it, it's going to take time to build up the trust and the network, which is quite it's common in property anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really important to take the time to build that up. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. So and initially when I started, I did pair up with other sources, and it's very common that people do 50-50 split. So you might be good at finding deals. You might have somebody with the network, and you might split the sourcing fee between you, because you both roles are vital. You can't have one without the other. So that's popular in the early days as well. And then as you grow that network yourself, you might start doing more and more deals on your own, and you get all sourcing fee. But it just depends what works for different people.
What would you say the advantages of doing property sourcing are in comparison to, say, I don't know, other strategies, service accommodation, HMOs, buy-to-lets? Well, what are the advantages of doing property sourcing?
I think when you become good at a particular skill and you hone it and you look after it, I recently heard a quote where the grass is greener where you water it, then not only do you generate an income, a healthy income for you, you could do one deal a month and that's £3,000 a month, say. But the bigger picture is you're helping people build a portfolio. There are a lot of investors out there who are looking for deals. And if you can cater for their needs, not only are you helping them, but you're helping yourself as well. And it just works. But it all comes down to taking the time to do it properly. And it's not a 2-month job and I'm up and running. So that would be my advice.
And then on the flip side, and this podcast series and this book as well is about providing reality. So let's try and get some of that in there as well. What would you say the disadvantages are of doing property sourcing?
Disadvantages, the breakdown in relationships. So if communication's poor anywhere in the whole deal, then deals can fall over. Vendors become frustrated. Estate agents potentially don't want to deal with you anymore if you are using estate agents. They have finance issues, or you have solicitors who might be slow at producing answers to queries, all of that conveyancing process, then it can become very tedious. But as a sourcer, that's what you've got to become good at. Communication, you deal with all parties and look after all parties. Whether you might act for the buyer, but you're also sourcing a deal. The buyer, you're also looking after the seller in a sense as well. So it's just managing all those relationships. And otherwise, if the chain essentially breaks or a cog breaks, then your whole deal can fall out and it doesn't reflect well on you as a sourcer.
I can well imagine so. And would you say it's, for people that are getting started, would you say it can be quite disadvantageous, the fact that sourcing is relatively chunky money, i.e. you're not going to get a couple of £100 a month guaranteed like you may or may not from a buy-to-let if you've got a good tenant in there? Would you say that's a disadvantage when you're getting started?
Yeah, the lure of that big chunk of money is, I think, why a lot of people start it. But when I first started, even though I wasn't actively, it was never a strategy I went out to do as in source, and I just had a spare deal here and there that I couldn't do and thought it was a good deal for another investor. It's exciting, but then if you can't complete on it or you can't source it, then you don't get anything for it. So it's a buy-to-let, a couple of hundred consistently every month, isn't it? Whereas a sourcing fee, you only get paid when the deal completes or exchanges. So it's a 3 or 4 months potentially down the line, and it's not today.
and you can even get down the line and something happens at the very end. Maybe a valuation goes wrong, or the solicitors might find something
Absolutely.
at the very end. So it's, I suppose the other caveat with that is you might get everything agreed in principle, which is great for everyone involved, and then it might get to the very end stage, something happens that's out of everyone's control, and you kind of just
The
got
whole
to
deal
basically
falls apart.
yeah.
And there's no income for that particular deal. So all that time and effort and money spent progressing the deal, the disadvantage is there is no recourse. That is part of the job, unfortunately.
Everyone's got a property horror story. Everyone's got one. Everyone's got one. You don't have to give away names or anything like that. Please don't. But if you've got a specific horror story, that's something that's happened to you, that you'd like to share with everyone, just as a dose of reality of stuff that can happen in property.
In terms of sourcing.
Oh, you put me on the spot now. Yeah, we'll do it in terms of sourcing, and then if you've got a different example from a personal experience, then add that in there as well.
Okay, so, my horror story would be what we've just discussed, really, is you source a deal, you do all this work, and then you're 4-5 months down the line and your buyer pulls out. So it's like, do I have somebody in the background who would take that on? And it may no longer be a good deal for whatever reason. The market might have changed and things may have changed. So that's happened to me a couple of times. I'm lucky I've got the network I've got, and I can generally find another buyer that it suits because I know each of their criteria. Or worst comes to worst, and I'll make sure I complete on it myself. That'd be my sourcing sort of horror story, because it's just part of the job, unfortunately. It's great when it works like anything, but then the flip side of that is if you were banking on that money and the deal falls over, you don't have another buyer who's willing to take it on, then potentially it could be dead in the water. So that's one. Personally, I think they're all lessons, aren't they, rather than horror stories. But a big one for me would be just knowing your numbers and doing your numbers right. Builders, having clear expectations and telling builders exactly what you want. So you might budget for a £20,000 refurb, for example, and it turns out at 30 or 35. So builders in the UK have been my horror and my challenge, because coming from Australia, I had certain preconceptions that people have certain qualifications in the building trade over here, and they don't. So you need to, I think as an investor, interview and see examples of projects and get a quote rather than estimate. So it was another thing of mine.
We live and learn.
We do live and learn, and I haven't given up, and I get up every day because at the end of the day, I enjoy it, and I can see portfolios growing, and that's the main thing, and helping tenants out.
When people talk to you about wanting to get involved in sourcing, wanting to start sourcing, and I'm talking from an agent point of view as such, what are the most common queries or concerns that you hear from people?
From a potential sourcer, sorry.
Yeah, if I was looking to get involved into property sourcing and starting up, and you obviously speak to a lot of people anyway, what are the common concerns and queries that you hear from people that are looking to start?
Initially, what do they need to do to become regulated? So it's becoming more and more prevalent in property training around the country that they need to be regulated if you're going to be a deal sourcer, which is great. But there's also a middleman in there, I think, making a lot of money out of it, when really, when I get queries through our platform about, because they have to be regulated to work on our platform, how they go about it, that's a popular question, and it's an eye-opener for them when they realise it isn't actually that expensive. They could just do it themselves. And that's the main thing, really.
Is there any specific property sourcing training that you could recommend, or a book that someone can read, or is it relatively straightforward? You can Google it and get started tomorrow.
Oh, so I'm bringing out an online module over the next few months for sourcing. Your network and building that is key. And I think there are many successful sources who haven't had formal property training. But if you wanted to, a lot of people do like the training because it shortcuts their way into the industry, potentially. So the PIN network, Simon Zicci runs 1 day, 3 day courses, depending on different strategies. So and they have networking events all around the country. So there's a good resource to tap into, and very educational is content that he delivers. So I'm on one of the PIN teams as well and have been for years, and I always get a lot out of it, and you meet lots of different investors as well. So there's both sides of the coin at those kind of events. As for other training that's out there, none that I really know of because I haven't been involved in much training over the recent years. If that helps.
Well, it's perfectly understandable. It's such a thing I like. The thing I like about property sourcing is, when if we're comparing this to, again, service accommodation, buy-to-lets, HMOs, etc., you can do course after course after course after course. Whereas property sourcing, to me, it strikes me that there's going to be some great content out there, but you might not necessarily need, a 2 or 3 day course to do it. You might be able to get away with it by, reading a good book or going on a 1 day event. If you have to set itself up and then you just crack on and do it. So
absolutely,
that's what I like about this.
Yeah, and it is quick to get started, and you can get out there. So if you've got some get up and go, you could start sourcing deals straight away, start your registration and regulation in process, and while it's going through, there's nothing to stop you viewing properties, making offers, all of that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're an investor saving for a pot, then that may take some time. And so it's a popular model for people who want to become involved in sourcing. They get some deals, they get a nice chunk of money, they build that pot, and then they can go out and invest themselves and build that credibility as they go.
Perfect. In terms of top tips for people wanting to get into sourcing, now I know you've covered a lot of really great things so far.
Regulation.
Yeah. If you had to summarise and put it as a top 3, what would your top 3 tips be for someone wanting to get into property sourcing?
My top 3 tips for property sourcing would be become good at your numbers. If your numbers don't work, you won't sell any deals. Build those relationships with various people through advertising. So you get your vendor leads, through agents, because they're a good source of leads as well. Your investors through networking groups. It's 2, isn't it? And my third one, just stay in people's mind. So whether that be across socials or whatever, you need to be at the forefront of your game, really, and that you create quality deals.
No, that's great. And then I suppose your magic star at the top of all that would be regulation. Make sure you're regulated and everything's above board as well. So let's make it 4 top tips. That's great.
Yeah, that's my number one. I think I've harped on them quite a bit throughout this about regulation. Without that, I don't think there is a business in sourcing for an individual. So I think as the market changes and people become more educated in property, then it just sets you apart from those who might not be doing such ethical deals per se.
Yeah, totally with you on that. Janice, just wrap up with a couple of quick questions. First one is about this strategy in the future. Where do you see property sourcing in 10, 20 years' time? Do you think it's still going to be around? What do you feel? How do you think about it?
I think it's a growing industry, and platforms like ours would be evidence of that because it grows all of the time, daily, with people putting deals on, people getting started. We're approachable. Our aim is to help people out, both the investor and the sourcer. So there is definitely, I think, a market there for good quality sources to produce good quality deals. and match them up to investors. And I think those that think it's pretty easy, well, no, they won't be around in 10 or 20 years' time, because it isn't easy. It takes a lot of time, energy and skill to build all those various facets. But I do think, done right, you can turn it into a sustainable business for years to come.
And just leading on from that, do you have any final words of wisdom, words of encouragement for people wanting to get involved in sourcing?
Find people that do what you want to do. So if you want to be a sourcer, go and find a sourcing agent or a company that is doing what you value, I guess. So if you think that a company like ours, for example, Property Deal Store, could help you, and you believe in our morals, and they're aligned with your own, then you might touch base with them and find out how they do it, what they do. And people should be and are generally happy to help others get on their feet, especially if they're new and want to set them on the right path. And equally, if you find people that don't align with your vision, then you've got to be able to walk away and just keep looking. So, and education is important. I am an ex-teacher, and so I've invested heavily in my own education to get the knowledge I need, especially in a foreign country. And I wouldn't change it for the world, because it's shortcut my time. What I've done in 5 years, I had 7 years in Australia, and I only managed to do 3 properties, whereas I've transacted dozens over the last 5 years or so. So that would be my top tips: education, and find somebody who's doing what you're doing, what you want to do.
Awesome stuff. That's really been incredibly useful, and thank you again for your time. Janice, you mentioned Property Deal Store a couple of times, so let's quickly wrap up with that. So if people want to find out more about yourself and your company, how can they do that?
So I'm one of the directors in propertydealstore.co.uk, and we do aim to connect buyers with sellers, and we have a open and honest platform. I'm easily accessible to help people along the journey, and I've got staff that can walk people through the various processes with it. Basically just reach out. We're happy to help, and we want to grow it organically, and we want quality sources on it. And then with that, you get quality investors as well who can complete on deals. So if I can help, just let me know.
Absolutely. And for the benefit of the podcast and the audiobook and so forth, for the podcast, the links will be in the show notes for the benefit of the audiobook. Or if you're reading this, just look below. The information will be down there. Janice, again, thank you very much for your time. I think that's really, really insightful look into property sourcing, how it works, and the benefits of it. So just to say all the best with your ventures, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's been a pleasure.